There's often a lot of manipulation that happens. They can be very charming. Being in a relationship with someone like this, you can really lose your sense of self. Hi, this is Jim Breon. Welcome to this YouTube channel where we discuss all things mental health. What I'm going to be talking about today is a subtype of narcissistic personality people have been asking me about, and it's called sexual narcissism. Now, sexual narcissism is not a diagnosis. It's a construct or a subtype of what we think about as manifestations of pathological narcissism. And remember that narcissism is a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is what we think of as narcissistic personality disorder, somebody that has all of those narcissistic traits in a pathological sense to the point that it encompasses their whole personality. And there are variations of narcissistic traits that can be problematic, and at the far end of the spectrum is what we think of as healthy narcissism. Feeling good about yourself, taking pride in your work, in your life. It's something that starts to develop in childhood, very young in childhood. So narcissism can range from normal and adaptive to pathological. Sexual narcissism is what happens when a person is self-centered, and they have these very self-centered patterns of sexual behavior, most often in an overt or grandiose narcissist. They're very dominant, very aggressive, versus an introverted narcissist or a vulnerable narcissist who is more shame-prone. But an overt and sexual narcissist is somebody who is very grandiose, egotistical, and preoccupied with their own needs, often hypersexual. They really meet their needs to a great extent through sexuality. So when we talk about hypersexuality, sometimes people think of this as sexual compulsivity or sexual addiction even. And they have a very casual attitude towards sexual encounters. They really don't think anything of it, as opposed to other people who, sex and intimacy have to go together, and you're very cautious about who you might be sexual with. A sexual narcissist they really have an inflated sense of their own skills, prowess, and they think of themselves as like sexual heroes. They can't imagine why anybody would not want to have sex with them. They grow bored very quickly, so they have this very high sensation-seeking element of their personality. They grow bored very quickly with a sexual partner, and often the sex is escalated to more and more intense levels. Many people who get into a relationship with somebody with pathological narcissism will, especially at the beginning of a relationship, note that the sex was incredible at the beginning. And that is something that happens often with a narcissistic person because they're very uninhibited. But I think it also has to do with the fact that when you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, sexuality may be the only actual connection that you ever have with them emotionally, other than the projections that they project on you, anger, manipulation. A sexual narcissist is more prone than most people to be in affairs, to have different sexual partners that they might actually have ongoing relationships with. But there's also an element of aggression in their sexuality. These are people who are not concerned about emotional closeness or intimacy. It's more of enmeshment, where their identity and yours is determined based on very rigid roles that people play. There's often a lot of manipulation that happens. They can be very charming. They might use money to obtain sex, so prostitutes and all of those things that go along with that, pretty common for them. A sexual narcissist will cheat on a partner without caring about it, whereas even an average person, so to speak, that might be involved in some kind of an affair, they still have guilt about it. But not so with a sexual narcissist, because they're really only focused on meeting their needs and no one else's. A sexual narcissist tends to be aggressive, and as with the traits of narcissism, they need praise, they need admiration, but they also feel entitled to sex from whoever they want it from. They're not concerned with their partner's needs. And really, I think the way they look at it is that, you should just comply with whatever I want and not complain about it. The other person's feelings, boundaries are really not taken into consideration. In fact, often a sexual narcissist takes pride and boosts their ego by breaking another person's boundaries, because that allows them to have control over the other person. People have asked me, are all narcissists hypersexual? No, they're not. And they've asked, are all narcissists violent? No, they're not. And narcissism is a clear predictor of domestic violence and sexual violence. There's actually been research done that shows a very strong connection between pornography use, escalating pornography use, and traits of narcissism. And there have been correlations between narcissism and sexual addiction, especially when somebody's a sexual narcissist. Often in the pursuit of meeting their own needs, they're really deflecting from internal wounds, and that compulsive pattern can be a form of affect dysregulation. In other words, they use sex to regulate their moods. They're anxious about something, they're stressed about something, and they'll turn to sex in order to regulate their emotions, or pornography, much the way that an addict might turn to alcohol or drugs. So you can imagine what it might be like to be in a relationship with a sexual narcissist. Somebody who's in a relationship with a narcissist with pathological levels of narcissism consistently struggles with feeling devalued. But in a case like this, you really feel used, devalued, and manipulated. And often they engage in something that I think of as psychological sexual violence, where a sexual narcissist they'll get you to reveal some deep secret, some sexual fantasy that you've had for years, and then set up a situation where you can play that out, and then they'll turn around and shame you for it and tell you what a terrible person you are for having those thoughts, for doing those types of things. So it really is a way of stripping down your defenses, and then when you're at a very vulnerable place, to really weaponize that vulnerability. One thing I think you have to recognize if you're in a relationship with a pathological narcissist, and particularly a sexual narcissist, is in all likelihood they are not going to change. Now, there are some narcissists that have a higher level of self-awareness than others, and if they're willing to do the work, which is often very long-term and difficult work, being in therapy for a very long time, they can learn to change their behaviors. But it's important to set boundaries with them and realize that if any change in the relationship is going to happen, it's going to come from you, not the other person. So you do need to set limits and boundaries and let them know what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do. And of course, you've got to be willing to pay the consequences for standing up to them. Giving ultimatums, I think, is not helpful, especially since I think an ultimatum is really kind of a threat. Like, if you don't stop doing this, I'm going to do this. And if you make that threat, you have to be willing to follow through with it. Otherwise, if you tell him or her that you're going to leave if they do that one more time, and then you don't, now they have control over you. They know that, your words, your threats are empty, and they recognize on another level how they can manipulate you. Being in a relationship with someone like this, you can really lose your sense of self, your connection, your sense of intimacy, and your boundaries are constantly violated. So you can really kind of lose a sense of who you are and having agency and autonomy in your own life. Ultimately, people have to make very difficult decisions in situations like this. Am I going to change and create some better situation within this relationship where I can feel more boundaried and healthy? Or do I need to leave? And unfortunately, being in a relationship with this type of personality structure, the healthiest thing is to leave. Not an easy thing, and it's complicated, but that is the best thing to do if you are not feeling safe and you're not feeling whole in a relationship like this. If the videos are helpful, I encourage you to like and subscribe and sign up for notifications so we can let you know when there's more material coming out. And I'm interested in what your thoughts are, so put comments down and create a conversation. And until the next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Bye-bye.